By the way, I've discovered, thanks to Rudy, I've discovered that Australians abbreviate words. So when you go to uni, which I normally would call university, right? When you go to uni in Australia, if you're in the Greek world, you go to uni to get a better job, because the objective of uni is making money, right? In the Hebrew world, you would never think of uni as going to make money. The only reason you get education is so that you will understand the purposes of God, right? So in the Hebrew world, I work in order to put bread on the table so I can go home and study Torah, right? You know, in the Greek world, that's never the case. I go to work so I can compile enough money so I can go on vacation and do what I really want, right? So if work is to express God's image in me, and God has a design for how He wants me to fit into the tapestry that He's weaving for the universe, then the most important thing I can do is understand that work is what I do that is right for myself and good for the world at the same time. Right? So you get to ask now you can ask about the job that you do. Is it right for you and good for the world at the same time? Right? And it can only be right for you if it serves God's purposes for you. And it can only be good for the world if it brings chaos out of order, order out of chaos, and fulfills the purposes that God has for the creation. If it does both of those things, then you're in the right place. If it doesn't do both of those things, then you're toiling, not working. Because work is ultimately my ability to worship the Creator while I'm doing the task that He wants me to do to fulfill His purposes for the restoration of the universe. Right? Most people in life do not work. They toil. And the way that you can tell that is you ask them, would you go to your job if they paid you nothing to do it? Right? And the answer for me is absolutely. I will still get on the airplane and I will still go to all these places because I love what I'm doing. And you take it away from me and I'm going to feel empty. Right? So I'm not motivated by the money. I'm motivated by the opportunity to sit with you and talk about what God says in the Bible. But most people I know wouldn't go to work if they didn't get paid. So they're there for the wrong purpose. They're not there to worship God and bless Him, glorify Him in their creation, in His creation and their efforts. They're there in order to get money so that they can actually go on vacation and do what they really like to do. Right? They don't love what they do. They do it because of other reasons. Okay? So, John and I put this book together to help people understand that the most important thing that you can do is do your passion and learn how to build an economic engine around what you're passionate about so that you can fulfill God's purposes in your life, because He designed those passions in you, right? So you can fulfill God's purposes in your life by blessing others and delighting Him and getting paid for it. Wouldn't that be nice? Right? So there's a chapter in this book called Rainbow Hunting. No, that's not it. There's a chapter in the book called Building an Economic Engine Around Your Passion. Yeah. Living in your zone where work becomes a delight. I can't remember where the chapter is. Anyway, the whole point of that book is to capture what it means to work, worship, and serve at the same time. And by the way, you can do that whether you're a cashier in a retail store or the CEO of a company. It doesn't matter what the career path is. It matters that you understand that this is what God wants from you. You're fulfilling it. It satisfies you. It blesses others, and it's a delight to Him. Right? That's what matters. Okay? So William Blake is right. What is work? Work is not toil. Work is doing what's right for me and good for the world at the same time. Right? So that means what's right for me has to be fulfilling. I'm doing what I love. It has to be energizing. It makes me want to continue. Right? Like, for example, somebody has to stand up in the back of the room and wave to me and say, hey, we need to take a break. Because otherwise, I'll just keep going. Because the more that I talk about this, the more energy I have to talk about it. Because it's exactly what God has in mind for me, to fulfill who I am and bless you. right? So I'm not going to stop talking about it until you're overloaded, until the steam is coming out of your ears, because it's so exciting to me to discover this stuff and to reveal it to you. That's why I got 9 books written. I didn't start writing those books until I realized what God was doing Hebraically. And as soon as I discovered that, there's no end to it. I can't wait to get back and study some more, right? Because it's passion that drives what I'm doing. Okay? So I want the same thing to happen to you. I want you to be so energized by what you do that you can't stop doing it. Right? I want you at the end of the day to say, can't I just stay a little bit longer? This is so exciting. I really don't want to go home yet. Right? It has to be viable. That is, it has to give me an edge over everybody else. Here's the idea. If you're doing what God intended you to do, you become maximally productive. Because you were equipped for that. It's built into how you do things. Therefore, you have an economic edge over everybody else. Right? It means that if you're doing what you love to do, and you're doing it because you're passionate about it, you're going to do it better than the guy who's only doing it for the reward. And therefore, you have an edge over him. Right? It happens in sports all the time. We recognize it in sports and music, we just don't recognize it in the rest of life. We recognize when someone is a virtuoso. We recognize when someone has such passion that the music they play just inspires us. We can't imagine how they could do that, right? Yo-Yo Ma, when he plays the cello. No one can imagine that anyone could get those sounds out of that instrument, and yet he does, right? When Stevie Wonder plays the piano, right? He doesn't. I heard an interview one time, and he's talking about this, and they asked him, how do you know what tunes to play on the piano? He says, I don't hear voices like sounds. I hear voices like music, and I just produce the music that fits the sound. Right? That's all. It's built right into him. Right? So it's so energizing that I don't want to quit. And it's because it's built in a part of me, it gives me the economic advantage over the person who just works for the reward. Right? I don't go to work for the money, I go to work because I love it. And by the way, that means I'm better at it. Okay? It's purposeful. It completes what I see as my destiny. Well, now, I don't know what God's got in mind for me tomorrow, but I know that I'm loving what I'm doing today. And so it fills me up. Right? So if we understand what work is from God's perspective, it should fill you up. You should be so excited about what you're doing that you can't stand the thought of not doing it anymore. Right? Right? In other words, you look at your career and you say, this is so amazing. I'm so blessed that God put me into this role. I can't imagine my life without it. If you can imagine your life without it, you probably need to rethink what you're doing. Right? And finally, it's useful. The key to what God wants out of your life is that it actually blesses others. It's not just about you. Right? And this is the lesson of karpon, which is the Greek word for fruit. Okay? So here's the idea of fruit. Are you guys growing an avocado tree in your backyard? What is that little thing that has a couple of leaves on it in that pot?
In the front.
In the front, yeah?
It's a peach.
Peach tree.
Yeah.
Okay, so good. At least we got some kind of fruit. Right. Okay. So eventually that tree will produce fruit, right? So here's what I want you to do. I want you to take all those peaches off that tree and plant them right next to that tree to nourish the tree. Will that work? No, you'll kill the tree because it'll make the soil too acidic and the tree will die. The tree can't eat its own fruit. It produces fruit for somebody else to eat, right? The idea of being fruitful is that you're fruitful for someone else, not for yourself. You don't reap the rewards of your own fruitfulness. Someone else reaps the rewards of your own fruitfulness, right? Which means, how are you going to survive? If you're a peach tree, how do you survive? By eating the peaches? No. You survive because someone else produces fertilizer, right? Someone else produces pollination. Someone else produces sunshine. Someone else produces water. And all those other fruits enable you to produce what you produce. Okay? So now let's put it in the context of the church. The church is a fruit-producing entity. Here's what it's supposed to do. The fruit of your life, which is the way God designed you, is to nourish me, not you. What you do for God is designed to feed us. As soon as you start eating the thing that you produce, you will starve all of us and get sick. Okay? Because you weren't designed to produce for yourself. You were designed to produce for everyone else. I was designed to produce for all of you. You were designed to produce for all of them. And I was designed to feed you, right? You were designed to feed all of us. If you try to eat your own food, you'll get sick. Okay? And we'll starve to death. Okay? So, here's the key question then. How do I know that I'm producing fruit that's delightful to God and blessing others? I do my own litmus test on how I'm producing? No. Who decides whether the fruit that I'm producing is useful? You or the people who are eating it?
Consumers.
The consumers. That's exactly right. So here's what you do. Every day you get up and you look in the mirror and you say, fruit of the Spirit. Lord, I'm so loving. I'm so forgiving. Oh, I have that great sense of peace. I'm looking in the mirror and I'm seeing how humble I am. Lord, I'm the most humble person I know, right? Is that what it's about? No. The only people who can decide whether you have love, joy, peace in your life are the other people, not you. You don't decide if you have love, joy, and peace. He decides whether you have love, joy, and peace. You go to him and say, Rudy, do I have love, joy, and peace in my life? And he says, well, and right away you're in trouble. Right?
You've been listening in.
That's right. But you see the point? I not only am I not the consumer of my own fruit, I am not my own fruit inspector either. The only person who can inspect my fruit, the fruitfulness of what God's doing in me, is you. So if you come here, and I'm supposed to be doing what God's intended me to do, and you go away not blessed, you didn't learn anything, you weren't challenged to do anything, you didn't change anything in your behavior, I failed. It doesn't matter how much I talk. It doesn't matter how many books I produce. It doesn't matter how many miles I travel. It only makes a difference if it changes you. And you're the only one who can decide that. Right? So, if I'm working according to God's image, it must make a difference to someone else, not me. I don't work according to my own standard of success. I only work according to your standard of my success. Right? Here's the guy who's the pastor of the church. Who determines whether he's doing the job?
Congregation.
Right, not him. Right? The only way that he knows that he's serving God's purposes is that his congregation is nourished, protected, sustained, chastised, developed by him. And they're the only ones who can tell. Right? So the true measure of the fruitfulness of my ministry isn't me. It comes from me asking the congregation, please evaluate me. How am I doing on the love, joy, peace stuff? Right? And if people say, well, you know, this guy, he's really intelligent, but boy, I've seen him get into arguments with people. I guess I didn't score very good on that. And now, they're the ones who determine whether or not I have fruit of the Spirit. Right? Not me. Okay? So same thing in work. Work is what's useful to others. So when John goes through the diagnostics, you don't do any paper and pencil, check off how you feel, would you rather go to a museum or a ball game. Right? You don't check that stuff. You know how we determine who you really are designed to be? By asking other people. Right? You fill in a journal that says, here are the significant events in my life where I blessed someone else. And then we go ask those people how they felt about it. Right? Because they're the ones who determine what's really happening in your life. It's the other person who decides whether or not I show God's promise and destiny and fulfillment in my life, not me.
So if you analyze someone and they can't come up with any examples?
I'm sorry, what?
If you can't come up with the examples where you blessed other people?
If you can't come up with any examples where you bless other people, you are really in toil. Right? Because God designed you to bless other people. Someplace along the way, over the course of your life, you were involved where someone else benefited from what you do. And then we want to know what that's about, because that gives us the clue into understanding how God designed you. Right? Now, I said there were 7 zones. That means you fit into one of those patterns of behavior that God designed into every human being. Right? And once you understand what that pattern of behavior is, you will see, remember we talked about repeating patterns? You will see how that pattern comes up over and over and over again in your life, in different circumstances, maybe even in different jobs, right? In different communities, in different locations. It doesn't matter where, because it's the same pattern that comes again and again and again and again. Right? The same default way that you interact with people again and again and again. And what we want to do is help you capture that so that you're aware of it. And therefore, you can enhance what you do and recognize where your shortcomings are. And fill in your shortcomings, not with you, but with somebody else who produces fertilizer because you produce peaches. See? Okay? So what does that mean over the course of a community? It means that in a community, everybody doesn't do the same thing. Everybody has a role to play that feeds everyone else. And if I'm the manager of the community, I need to know what those people's roles are so that I can nourish them to do what God has designed them to do so that everyone gets fed. Right? I want to go to the banquet table at church and discover that every single person there is producing a wonderful banquet that I can partake in. And I bring my food with me and share it with them. That's what community is. If you go to a congregation where you are the passive recipient of somebody else's work, but you don't produce any food for anyone else, it's not a congregation in biblical sense. Right? It's a Greek congregation. You might as well go to the theater. You pay your money. So the only difference is in church is that you pay afterwards. Right? Right, it's true. Right? You go to the movie theater and you pay ahead of time and you hope the movie's any good. But at the church, at least you get to experience the sermon, and then you can decide whether or not you want to tithe, if it was any good or not, right? How do you determine whether it's any good? Oh, if it meant something to me. But that's pointless. What it should be is driving me to produce fruit for other people. Right? So, how does a community survive? A community survives on the basis that everyone produces for everyone else. If there are people who are not producing in the community, they are causing other people to starve. That vital nutrient that I must have for the life of the community, you are withholding from me because you refuse to allow your fruit to bless everybody else.
Is that capitalism or perfect socialism?
Well, it's profitable. So therefore it must be capitalism. And it's for everyone, so therefore it must be socialism. So it's capisocialism. It's capisocialism.
But it's sort of both in the perfect sense.
Yeah, because
capitalism where it's not purely about enriching me, and socialism not where you need to work.
Listen, it's not about the redistribution of my talent. It's about me performing excellently so that you benefit, but it's also not about me performing for my own purposes. I don't keep the profit so that I can go on vacation. I distribute the profit of my effort to you so that you can be blessed and we can all go on vacation. Right?
It's an abundance mentality.
Yeah. I mean, you see how God designed this? First he designed it so that you can't act independently. Independence is not a Hebrew term. You are dependent upon the community because you can't survive without them. You must have what they produce in order to feed yourself. Right? But if you only eat and don't produce, you starve someone else. So the community must have the active participation of everyone in order for God's purposes to be fulfilled. Right? So you can't go to a church where the professionals perform and the audience receives. It doesn't work that way. In the biblical sense, a community is everyone receiving and performing at the same time. Right?
Given that would be sort of detour slightly, so given that that's sort of the idea, can that work unlimitedly, or does that concept cap the size of a congregation?
Oh, thank you very much. Because if you read Malcolm Gladding's work, you'll realize, the book's called The Tipping Point, that the maximum number of people of relationships that mean something, of significant relationships for a human being is about 150. So once I get bigger than 150, Gladding says, once you're bigger than 150, the next person in is a stranger. And here's the problem. A stranger is not a producer and consumer of a circle of intimate relationships. Right? A stranger is on the outside. Right? So go to Joel Osteen's 50,000 member church. I'll guarantee you that nobody in that church, including Joel, knows all 50,000 people. It's impossible. Right? The ideal community is something less than 150 people. Because I can understand my relationship and I can remember, I might be able to remember your name, but I know I associate with you when it's 150 or less. More than 150 means that there's people in there that I don't know. And how can I be a benefit to them and enjoy what they produce if I don't know them? As I've often said to I teach in a graduate school in a seminary, so all my students, virtually all my students are pastors, which is an interesting and unique problem in itself. And I often say to them, let's get straight about this. You cannot disciple a stranger. Discipling a stranger is an oxymoron. Discipleship demands intimate relationship with another person. Right? So the idea that you're going to go knock on somebody's door and invite them to church that you don't know is contrary to everything in the Bible. Because the only people you invite to join you into your intimate fellowship of fruit-bearing people are friends, not strangers. A stranger doesn't know what he's doing in the orchard. He has no idea. You need to invite people who understand that they're in the orchard in order to produce and consume. And who are those people? Friends. And so what's your job in evangelism? To make friends. That's what it is. Your objective in life is to make friends. How do you do that? By convincing them that if they don't believe like you do, they're going to go to hell? That will help them be a real friend. Right? No, how do you make a friend? You say, man, I'm going to the cricket game. I got a couple of tickets. Would you like to go? Or, my family's going to the beach for the week for a picnic. Your children are about the age of my children. Why don't you come along with us? Or, come over for dinner. Or, hey, I see you're going on vacation. Can I pick up your mail for you? Can I mow your lawn while you're gone? What do you do to make a friend? Right? Why am I asking you? You figured it out with her. Right? You knew how to make a friend out of her, which ultimately ended up in a better than friendship relationship, right? Okay, so what's the problem? Do we not know how to make friends? Of course we do. So why do we have so much problem with trying to encourage people to join our assembly? Because we stopped making friends. We just tried to recruit them. Right? Well, the point is, I can't disciple anybody that I don't know, so I must first make a friend. Right? And the best way to make a friend is to provide them with something that means something to them, that satisfies them, that encourages them. And by the way, that's exactly what Jeremiah says when the children of Israel go into Babylon. Right? Here's what we should talk about this. There's a whole thing on this. It's called living it. Right? And here's what happens. The Babylonians come into Israel and they slaughter people by the thousands. Right? They put a siege on Jerusalem so bad that mothers eat their own children in order to survive. That's bad news. You haven't seen that kind of thing happen in Australia yet. All right? So it's real terrible. So when the Israelites finally capitulate and they're overrun by the Babylonians and they destroy their culture, They carry off all the intelligentsia and all the important people to Babylon, then leave the rest of them behind because they're just dirt farmers. Who cares about them, right? When they get to Babylon, what would you expect the Israelites to do, to think about the Babylonians?
Bad people.
They would think, they're being carried off as slaves, by the way. They would think, I'm not going to help you. I'm going to do everything I can to resist you. I'm going to fight you at every turn. I'm going to close my doors to my community so that you don't affect me anymore. I hate you because of what you did. Right? That's what you would think that they would do. In fact, you would think that God would tell them, don't you have anything to do with these pagan, idolatrous people. Right? Get your synagogues nice and tight, build big walls, marry inside your own community, and don't let anybody in. Right? What does Jeremiah say that the people should do when they go to Babylon? Well, you're supposed to know this. Right? You're supposed to know because if you don't know this, you can't understand what God's doing. You live in Babylon, by the way. In case you haven't figured that out, you live in Babylon.
I think he said, do your best there and plant and
I'm so glad. See,
build up.
This nice thing about this is he's paraphrasing, so we don't exactly know what God says, but close, right? So
I'm trying to paraphrase from what I remember, and obviously.
Well, here's what he says: prosper them, right? Plant vineyards, marry, have children, have your children have children. Build houses. It goes right through the list. And what is the list all about? Doing things for them which benefit them. That's really ridiculous. Because they're carrying me off as a slave, and God's telling me to benefit the people who carried me off as slaves. He says, my job while I'm in Babylon is to make their lives better. Now, why would he do that? And the answer is real simple. If I resist you, and claim that my God hates your idolatry, I'm going to have nothing to do with you, is there any reason that you would come to me and ask me about my God? No. But if I come in as a slave, and everything I do is to make your life better, aren't you at some point going to ask, why do you do that? I went into your city and destroyed it, and here you are trying to make my life better. Why would you do that? It's contrary to human nature. And God designed you to act contrary to human nature so that you would create the question, why did you do that? Right? So here's what you can think of. You got neighbors? Do things that are contrary to human nature. Right? When you do that, you create a question in their minds. Why would you do that? And as soon as they ask, why would you do that? They open the door for you to say, because I serve a God who loves you. The fruit of my life must benefit your life. And it doesn't say the fruit of my life must benefit those who believe exactly like I do. Okay? So.
It should say that.
Oh, it should say that. Right. So here's the point. If we understand work, avodah, is work, worship, and service, we realize that what God designed us to do, and what he specifically designed you to be passionate about, is something that will bless others at the same time it glorifies him. Right? And he doesn't put a limit or a cap on who those others are. You will bless others and glorify him at the same time. Right? Okay, so what happens when every employee is doing exactly what they were born to do?
Very successful.
I'm sorry?
Very successful business.
You bet. In fact, James Collins wrote a book called Good to Great. And what he said in that book is, if you work for a great company, they know which people to put on the bus. Right? They also know which people to take off the bus. But they don't tell you which direction to drive the bus. Why? Because if you put people into jobs that they love to do, they will know where they want to go. You don't have to manage the direction. You have to manage who you put on the bus and who you take off the bus. And if you're running a business or you're part of a business, the most important thing that you can do is put people in jobs that they love. Right? And I'll guarantee you, well, here's what will happen. I mean, we've got all the studies. All the evidence is there. Absenteeism goes down. Illness goes down. Stress-related incidents go down. Right? What goes up? Productivity. Right? What goes up? Overtime without pay. Because people love what they're doing. So the job of the manager, what we have is, the next book is about zone management. The job of the manager, the job of the pastor, who is a zone manager, is to put people in jobs that they love. And let the church flourish on the basis of passion, not on the basis of what tasks need to be done today. Right? You'll have a whole list of tasks because you're a pastor. You may discover that no one in your church wants to do any of those, but they're passionate about other things. So your job is to take that passion, harness it for God's purposes, and let them do it. Because the church should be the one place in the world where I go that people absolutely love me for what I produce. Right? They love me because my fruit benefits them. Right? So, what are the results of aligning my business with natural zones? Morale, compensation, loyalty, absence, stress, all that stuff. And look, it isn't theory. There's evidence for all this. Statistical evidence for all this stuff. Right? There it is. Getting the right people on the bus. And that's the book. Oh, what's really interesting about this book is, and there's an appendix in this book. Has anybody read this book? It was a big, huge, worldwide bestseller when it came out. In the appendix, there's a question. The question is, somebody asked Jim Collins, okay, I understand about getting the right people on the bus, but how do I know how to select the right leader, the level 5 leader? And Collins says, it's really interesting, Collins says, yeah, the level 5 leader, we looked at that, and it was like a black box, and when we opened it, we couldn't find anything in there. In other words, we couldn't find the characteristics that were true of all level 5 leaders depending on the greatness of the company. And the reason he couldn't find it is because he didn't read the Bible. Because in the Bible, it's laid out perfectly. It's all about understanding my design. The level 5 leader is the guy who understands his design and works according to his passion.
His own or his people?
No, he works according to his passion. He fulfills his passion, which means that he gathers around him all the people that he needs that aren't like him. Right? Here's what most CEOs, certainly most politicians, certainly the president of my country, gathers around people who are just like him. Yep. And they are collectively incompetent. Okay? What a level 5 leader does is gather the people around him who aren't like him. Because he knows, look, I'm no good at this. I need somebody who's passionate about that. I'm no good at this job. I need somebody who's passionate about that. And he goes out and collects the people who are excellent at what they do that enhances who he is. So you're the pastor of the church. You need to know what zone you're in. You need to know how you are designed to fulfill your passion in this community. And that doesn't mean you do all the jobs. Perfect example, okay? I am absolutely the wrong guy to send to a hospital for visitation to the person who's dying. Why? Because I'm interested in what the Word of God says and helping to unpack that. And life and death, okay, so big deal, you know. You get a little emotional about it, right? Because I'm the zone 1. I'm looking for, how do I help you understand the deeper meaning of this? That's not what a person needs when they're on the verge of dying. They need a zone 4 who comes along and holds their hand and says, I'm feeling your pain, weeps with you, and cries with you over your regrets in your life, and prays with you and rejoices over the victories in your life. That's not me. I'm the guy who comes in and writes the book, right? But what does that tell me? If I'm going to be a pastor, I need to find somebody who's a zone 4 that I can send to the hospital. Right? I'm not going to go to the hospital. I'm going to send that person because they're passionate about it. I'm not, you might find this surprising, but I'm not a teacher. Right? A teacher is a person who is the word is didaskale in Greek. And what it means is In a zone, what it means is someone who can go over and over and over the material until you, the student, understand everything that the teacher understands. Okay? So that, and my friend Bob Gorlick is a zone 3. So he and I go to Israel. And he can go to the same places every single trip because they're new people. And he can go over the same material at the Mount of Olives, explaining to a new audience what the significance of the Mount of Olives. And he's excited about it because he has new students and he's communicating to them new information. And I'm bored out of my mind because I want to go to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. Why do you think I travel 150,000 miles a year? Because there's always a new place to go, right? My passion is what else is on the horizon? Where can we go next, right? So I just wrote a book on the cross. It's great, it's done. Now I'll go do something else, right? But Bob will take the book on the cross and help you understand it. And then another audience will come in and he'll help them understand it. And another audience will come in and he'll help them understand it. So a really great teacher, by the way, this is good for all of you who have children in school. A really great teacher never fulfills their passion until the student understands perfectly what they're communicating. Right? Until the student gets it, the measure of a teacher is, does the student understand? The measure of a teacher is not, can the student repeat the answers that I want? The measure of a teacher is, does the student understand? Because the teacher understands. And the idea is to communicate that understanding in such a way that the student understands. Okay? But I'm a zone 1. My idea is, if you can't keep up, too bad. Right? I'm on to the next thing. Right? So get a little steam, overload, and let's go to the next point. Right? Okay? Got it. So I don't make a very good, I make a great person to come in and prod you to keep going. But I don't make a very good person who's going to preach week after week to help you understand. My view is, by the time I get bored, it's time to go to the next thing. And this is a real problem because I teach in a seminary, right? And the president of the seminary assigns me to teach the same class over and over. By the time I've taught it twice, I'm done. I mean, I'm ready to teach something else, right? But they don't have anybody else to teach this class on the Hebrew meaning of prayer. So, I shouldn't tell you this, but it'll reveal this zone stuff. So all the classes are online, right? So I'm sitting in front of a computer communicating with these people from all over the world on the Hebrew view of prayer. So what have I done? By the time I get to the 3rd time I've taught this, I just recorded it all, press the button, walk away and do something else while my voice is going over the computer, right? Because it's too boring for me to do it again. I need to get on with something new. Right?
How does a zone 1 go to church?
I'm sorry?
How does a zone 1 go to church?
Yeah.
Good question.
I'll tell you how I go to church, and you'll appreciate this, Johan. Johan and I share the same name, so we're buddies, right? Here's the only church I ever went to that I really found exciting was a congregational church where I had an agreement with the pastor that I would provide him with a critical review of his sermon at the end of each week. So I would take notes, do all the academic research, check his exegesis, make sure that he understood the Hebrew and Greek words correctly, and then, as soon as the service was over, I'd go and write him an email and send it to him and critique how he did. I love that church. But guess what? It took an enormous amount of humility for the pastor to agree to let me do that, right? I mean, it was beneficial for both of us because he was a great guy and he loved the academic stuff and he had nobody else in the congregation would do that. Everybody else would say, "Nice sermon, Pastor," as they walked out. "Oh, that was so interesting, Pastor." And I would say, I think that passage in Micah, you missed the Hebrew, the nuance of the Hebrew verb there. Da, 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 da. And he would say, "Oh, that's so cool. I'm glad you caught that," right? But most pastors can't stand me to be in the congregation because I'm such a threat to them. Right? They would just as soon have me not show up, which is fine with me, because I want to be in the dialogue. Right? Okay. So now Johan knows. If he invites me, he's likely to get a review. Right? Right.
B-.
Yeah, because the point is, my passion is about, do you really grasp what's here? Right? It's like we were talking about the Zer Connector. right? We're talking about the insights into the story. What happens underneath the surface? How many of you before tonight thought about repeating patterns? Thought about, oh, we didn't talk about the best part, why she's named Chava, right? All that kind of stuff. You don't think about that. You just read the story and you think, oh, that's an interesting story. But not for me. For me, it's teasing out all of the meanings that lay below the surface, deeper and deeper and deeper until I understand all the concepts that are in the story, right? Then it makes it rich and beautiful and wonderful. And then I get to communicate it to you, right? Okay, so work, is work a blessing or a curse? Avodah versus atzav. This is really important because this is what happens in Genesis 3. Genesis 3 starts with Chava's desire to be better at her job, to help him be better, right? But because she steps outside of the boundaries that God put on her by bringing her own agenda into the equation, she changes the dynamics of the relationship, right? She doesn't mean to. She's not saying to herself, I'm going to get even with that Adam. You know, God created him first, but I should have been first, so therefore I'm going to make his life miserable. No, she doesn't say that. She's trying to be a better Ezer Kenegdo, right? By what? By determining what is good for them without consulting God. And only God can determine what's good. As soon as she decides that the fruit was good for what? It was good to see, it was good to taste, it was good for knowledge. But the problem is, she hadn't even eaten it yet.
Okay. So she sinned in her purpose.
She sinned by stepping over the boundaries that God put around her purpose. Right?
But she was acting in her purpose and she actually wanted to do it really well.
That's right. She wanted to do it more than God allowed. It wasn't that she had the wrong purpose. Her purpose was to bless her man, to serve him in such a way that he fulfilled God's commandments. Okay? But God puts fences around everything. And she said, that tree, it's 3 feet outside the fence. If I just move the fence 3 feet, I'll be able to use that tree for this purpose as well. Right?
So why did God tell Adam
What?
Eve?
What? I'm sorry?
Why did God tell Adam before he created Eve that he mustn't eat the fruit of the tree?
This is very interesting. I'm so glad you brought this up.
If he was expecting so much of Eve, surely he should have told her himself.
Yeah, let's see how this works out. Okay? So God tells Adam the commandment, right? What does God say the commandment is?
Do not eat from the fruit.
Well, there's 2 parts of the commandment. The first part of the commandment is, of every tree of the garden you may eat. It actually says you may akal tokel, you may freely eat, you may eat. And in fact, in Hebrew, it's an idiom for stuff yourself. Okay? Of every tree of the garden you may stuff yourself, you may feast. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you may not eat, because in the day that you eat of it, you will die, mut, you will surely die, is the way it's translated. Okay? Now, of course, die doesn't mean anything to Adam, so we know that the story was written for people coming out of Israel. Right? So, what does the commandment actually say? It says that you may not eat of the tree, because in the day you eat of it, you will die. What does Eve say the commandment is?
Do not touch any.
Thank you very much. She says, but God said to us, you may not touch the tree or eat of it. Okay? So, where did she get the idea of not touching the tree? Did she make it up?
From Adam.
Yeah, that's right. The point is, the rabbis say, don't you see, Adam gave her an instruction that God didn't give him. Why would Adam add, nor may we touch it?
To keep her away, buffer.
Thank you.
The oral
In order
Torah.
to put a fence around Torah, he added something to the commandment that enhanced it. He feared that she might actually be tempted to eat it, and so he said, you can't even touch it, thinking that that would prevent her from eating it. Okay? But the result was disaster. Why? Because he introduced into the commandment something God didn't say. So, the rabbis say, here's the tree, here's the fruit, here comes the serpent. You say to me, you can't eat of it, and you can't touch it. And what does the serpent do?
Hold
Didn't bother me. I'm handling the fruit quite well. It feels really nice. I'm not dying. And what does that do about the commandment? It puts in jeopardy the whole commandment. Because if this piece is wrong, how do I know the other piece is wrong? What the serpent does is use the addition that Adam added in order to introduce into the commandment the possibility that the whole thing is fake, false, right? So when Chava repeats what Adam said, she repeats what Adam added, and therefore gives the opportunity for the serpent to suggest that the whole thing is wrong. Okay? So why do I need that in the story? Because Adam's job is to remember exactly what God says and communicate it word for word, no more, no less. I need that in the story because otherwise Adam has no responsibility for what happens with Chava. In other words, if he communicated it correctly, she wouldn't have allowed the opening for the serpent. More importantly, the Hebrew text says that in the middle of that conversation, he was standing right next to her. Right? It says that he was with her. And the Hebrew word means to be in the same presence of. Right? So the serpent is talking. By the way, why is the serpent talking to the Ezer Kenegdo instead of Adam? Why doesn't the serpent go to Adam and say, did God say that you...
Because he knows what God said.
Because he knows what God said, and his job is to listen to her. So if I can get her to agree, he will listen. Like a good puppy dog, he'll just come right along after her. Okay? Right? That's propaganda. The role. The role of the Ezer Kenegdo is to advise him about what God wants for him.
But then surely God should tell her directly.
Why?
Well, if she's going to be advising him, surely she should know what she should be advising him on.
But that's not the role. The role is that God tells him so that he will instruct her properly so that she can complete her role that God has intended for her in relation to the commandment given to him.
Amen.
Right? Why would I take the responsibility away from him and give it only to her?
Well, because he never told her what the truth
But
was. And when the serpent was there, he still didn't say it to her. But God never said that.
You're exactly right. But what does that tell you? The original sin was that Adam added to the Word of God. And that's why Paul says Adam sinned deliberately, but Eve was seduced. Right? There's a difference. Adam sinned deliberately. He added to God's Word. And when he communicated the addition, he opened the door for sin to come in. Right? So she did what she thought she was supposed to do in terms of the commandment. She didn't follow it. But this is quite interesting. Not only did Adam not say anything, which he was supposed to, not only did he add to the Word, which he was not supposed to do, but he didn't speak up when he was supposed to. He allowed her to take the conversation. She said, listen, dear, it's okay. I'll handle this. And he should have said, this is what God said. But instead, he allowed her to repeat back what he said. And when that happened, the door opened for the serpent to cause them to doubt the whole thing. Right? It's all very twisted because they didn't do exactly what God asked them to do. Right? And the net result is the best part. The net result is he blames her. He started the whole thing by adding to it. And then he says it's all your fault. Right? Don't you see how it's a perfect pattern of dysfunctional relationships? It's exactly what happens. Right?
Blame the government for everything.
Yeah. Right. It's exactly what happens, isn't it? You don't understand exactly what God says. You communicate something that you think will enhance what God says because you're afraid the other person can't handle it. Right? When you do that, you've already distrusted the relationship. She responds to what you told her. The result is disaster for you, and then you blame her for it. It's perfect. Right?
There's a passage in Timothy where it says that it was not Adam who was deceived, but it was Eve.
Yes,
how do you...
but deceived isn't the same as deliberate sin.
Yeah, sure.
The idea is seduction, right? She believed that what she was doing is correct, but she was incorrect in that belief. That's different than Adam, who knew exactly what he was supposed to do and didn't do it. Right?
So Paul's idea in that passage is that the man should teach because Eve was deceived, which implies that she could, a woman can easily be deceived. A wife could.
Does it imply that a woman can easily be deceived?
That's how you can. That's how you can. You can suggest Paul is saying. I'm not sure. What's your view on that?
My view is that if I believe that all women are easily deceived because Paul makes a comment about Hava, I've really overstepped the boundary, right? It has absolutely nothing to do with all women being deceived. He's talking about one woman and the introduction of sin into this equation. And what he says is, Adam deliberately sinned, but she was deceived. What does that mean? That she didn't deliberately go into the idea of, I'm going to disobey God. She went into the process believing that she was doing something that God wanted. To be a better Azir. And that it was the serpent that deceived her into thinking that what she could do on her own would improve her role with him, with her husband.
Sure, I understand. But my question was, what do you think Paul is actually saying in that passage when it says the woman, the wife? I mean, some people say that the word woman there should be translated wife, not general woman.
What are we talking about? Where he says women should not teach?
In Timothy, I do not suffer the woman to teach.
You have to read the book because, I mean, the Christian idea that means that women shouldn't teach men is absolutely off track. It's built on a Catholic idea about the insufficiency of the female as inadequate males, right? It comes from Aristotle that women are defective men. But it doesn't have to be... That's Aristotle taught that women were defective men, right? If they had been truly equipped, they would have been men, but they're defective. It's true. It's what Aristotle taught.
So what do you think Paul is actually saying?
What Paul's, if you look at the Greek passage, you'll see that Paul moves from women plural to woman singular back to women. What Paul's actually saying is, there's a woman in your congregation, Timothy, who isn't teaching correctly. She needs to be not allowed to teach others until you bring her back into alignment with what the true doctrine of the faith is.
But look what's just happening in this simple thing here, and thank you, because you've really helped, we think Greek, we think all these types of stuff.
Yeah.
But what you started off and what you've opened the door for me was, it's culture.
Yeah.
So just go back to the Garden of Eden. And here's Adam saying, manage chaos. God's not a God of chaos. Just don't even go into the legal arguments or what's in the funny bits and this way, and if I go left, they'll go right. And stop. Just hold on. This is manage God. Chaos. Don't go there. Don't open the door. You've got a choice.
That's right.
Just stop.
And how do I manage chaos?
Back to what God said.
I do what God says. And what does God say? Torah. So if I live Torah, I manage chaos. Right? Which means, by the way, that I have to know what it says. I can't just guess at it. Oh, I think it was kind of like this. No. You see what happens when I think it was kind of like this? I add a word, I take away a word. As soon as that happens, I open the door for the possibility of undermining the whole thing. That's what the story is about. How it gets undermined. In other words, you didn't do it, you were in the garden. You didn't do it for the wrong reasons. You did it for the right reasons, but you did the wrong thing. You had noble purposes, but you didn't do exactly what God asks. Right? Which is effectively the same as saying, it doesn't matter what your intentions are, it matters what you actually do. Right? Good intentions don't get you anywhere in Torah. You actually have to do what God says.
And God will bring us back time and time again until we get it right.
Absolutely. So the wheel turns and turns and turns until you finally figure it out. Right?
So
no one graduates out of kindergarten until they get the lesson.
Before you move on, because if you go to Abraham and Sarah, it was the same thing. God told Abraham, He didn't
Yep.
tell Sarah. So
What do you
it's
know?
the same-
And
it's the
Sarah
same
comes
thing.
along and says, how did Sarah know that Abraham was going to be blessed with a child? Because Abraham told Sarah.
Yes,
Right.
exactly. But
He
she...
probably didn't tell her told from you.
Right.
Don't go there.
Right. You see?
Yeah, no, I do see. But then, for the woman to be the helper for the man has to tell her the truth.
What do
As
you
God
know?
said.
What do you know? If he doesn't tell her the truth, in other words, if he doesn't tell her exactly what God said, she works under the false premise and consequently can't do her job. Right? I mean, you see, it's mutual submission. One has to do what the other needs. It's fruit. His fruit must be consumable by her. She must produce fruit that he can eat and be nourished from. Right? It's no good for me to remember what God says and keep it to myself. It's not going to work that way. Right? So, we're back to this. Avodah, the curses of Genesis 3. And this is what's really important. The curses of Genesis 3 help us explain why there's so much chaos with the work sorrow issue. Right? Because Genesis 3 is based on a Hebrew principle called measure for measure, which means that the punishment fits the crime. Okay? In Hebrew, the punishment always fits the crime. Remember the eye for eye, tooth for tooth? That means if you knock out one of my teeth, I can't take two of yours. It's measure for measure. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Does that mean that if you knock out my tooth, I'm obligated to take yours? No. That's the limit of what I can take. It's the maximum penalty, not the minimum penalty. Okay? But measure for measure is a Hebrew principle that runs all the way through Scripture. So now let's back up and ask, what is the punishment that God assigns to Adam?
You toil. You sweat of your...
Yeah, in relation to what?
To work.
To
his work, to his labor.
To his labor, not work, to his labor over what?
The land.
The land, the source. The Adamah that he comes from. He is Adam, and he comes from Adamah. And now God says, as a result of your disobedience, the source that you come from will resist you. You, by the way, still have to produce. I didn't take the assignment away from you. You still have to bring order to chaos. But now, what you work with won't be so easy anymore. It will fight back. It will resist. It won't flourish under your hand. Okay? Right. So, measure for measure means Adam sins against his own stewardship of the land that God gave him, and the land now fights back. His source, where he came from, the earth, now becomes his own worst enemy. Okay? Where do you come from? From Adam. Right, so measure for measure should say what? Your source resists you. What were you supposed to do with the source? Guide him into the purposes God has. How will he resist you? By not listening to you anymore because you failed once. Right. So what does Adam do? He says, hey, by the way, last time I listened to you, it didn't work out so well for me. So guess what? I'm going to make the decisions in the house from now on. From now on, I'll make the choices and you will listen to me. From now on, I won't trust you anymore because the last time I listened to you, oh yeah, I realized I didn't tell you the truth, but it doesn't matter. Look what happened to me. It's your fault. Therefore, I'm not going to listen to you anymore. In other words, the source that you came from will resist you. Okay? And that's what the verse says when it says, you have turned toward your husband and he will rule over you. It doesn't say you will lust for your husband, you will desire for your husband. The word is teshuvah, right? It only occurs 3 times in Scripture, and the reason that it's translated lust or desire is because Pagnino, an Italian monk in the 15th century, didn't know Hebrew, and he translated it wrong. And Whitfield picked it up, and the Cloverdale picked it up, and it's been translated and modified from lust to desire. So your Bible will say your desire will be for your husband, but he will rule over you. But that's not what it says in Hebrew. In Hebrew it says, you turned to your husband, that is, you made him more important than God, And as a result of that, the relationship is broken and he will resist you. Okay? Which is exactly what happens. Because men blame their wives for everything that goes bad with them. Right? Because they didn't instruct the wife in the first place about what God wanted, and they didn't listen to the red light, green light, and when it goes bad, they say, oh, it's your fault. Right? It's just the classic relationship. Okay? And by the way, the verse also doesn't say, I will greatly increase your pain in childbearing. It doesn't say that in Hebrew.
What does it say?
Oh, isn't that interesting? In Hebrew, the translation, I will greatly increase your pain in childbearing, depends on where the pointing goes in that verse, and the pointing was added 1,400 years after the verse was written. So Catherine Bushnell points out that if I remove the points, the little vowel marks, there's a vowel mark called a shavah, which tells me where the syllable breaks. If I remove the shavah and it changes the syllable break, the verse reads, the one who deceived you has increased your pain. You have turned toward your husband and he will rule over you. Which is an exact description of what the story is all about.
Okay, say it again.
The one who deceived you has greatly increased your pain. Not I will greatly increase your pain, but the one who deceived you has greatly increased your pain. Right? Which is exactly true. The serpent deceived her and her pain increased. Right? And when you think about it, what kind of God would God be if as a result of your unintentional disobedience, he decides to strap you with pain in childbirth for the rest of your life? That sounds like a real generous, forgiving, compassionate God to me. Right? It doesn't sound like that. It sounds like a God who's vindictive. So the translation of the verse, I will greatly increase your childbearing, first has nothing to do with measure for measure, and it makes God into a vindictive tyrant. But the translation of the verse, the one who seduced you has increased your pain, your husband will turn against you, makes perfect sense in terms of the story. Right? And Catherine Bushnell pointed this out 120 years ago, and the scholarly community basically ignored her because she was a woman.
Of course.
Right. Right? Because only men could be academically ingenious enough to understand Scripture. I mean, it's sad because she pointed this out a long time ago. Right? But nobody changed the translations as a result of that.
She writes about Timothy as well.
Right, okay.
There's a whole book.
Yeah, her book, you read her book, right? God's Word for Women. Mm-hmm. Right. So the point is, she makes all these points. In fact, her most powerful argument is, when Yeshua says in the new kingdom, there will be no distinction between male and female, slave and free, Greek or Gentile and Jew. And we go along then telling women that they can't teach, they can't preach. What we've done is what we've done is violated Yeshua's own word. Because if there's no distinction between male and female, why are we making artificial distinctions?
You mean Paul?
I'm sorry?
Paul, you mean Paul is saying that there's no distinction?
Oh, yeah. Okay? So that's a really powerful argument, because if we believe what Paul says about the kingdom, why do we then determine that women can't teach men? Because they're different than, they've been limited in what they can do. Doesn't make any sense. Anyway, all that stuff is in the book Guardian Angel. But you see what happens? Once I introduce the wrong terms, all the consequences fall out. So what we're trying to do here is realize that the curses of Genesis 3 and the assignment of God don't change anything about what he expects you to do when it comes to work, worship, and serve. None of that changes. It's just harder. It's just harder. That's all. You used to be able to do it in the garden where everything worked perfectly. Now you have to figure out how it works in Babylon, where the culture is against you. That's all. But it doesn't change the assignment one bit. You still have to do what God assigned you to do. Right? Right. You're still obligated to act as red light, green light. That's how you were designed. Right? You can't say, oh yeah, but he doesn't listen to me, therefore I won't be red light, green light anymore. Wrong. You were designed that way. Right. Okay? That role doesn't go away. His role as the one who's responsible for understanding what God says and applying it in the restoration of the kingdom doesn't go away. It's just harder.
In the Jewish culture, what you're telling us and teaching us.
I'm sorry, what?
In Jewish culture, is what you're telling us and teaching us in this way of thinking, is this taken as granted? You know,
well, it is by the sages. I mean, Maimonides talks about this.
No, sorry. What I'm saying is that, so if there were Jews in the room, would they be understanding this differently to the way that we understand it?
If there were Jews in the room, they'd understand it the way I'm telling you.
And that's
Right?
it, yeah.
It's the Christian church that reinterpreted this stuff according to the culture that it came out of, which was the pagan, Roman, Greek philosophy culture where women were already second-class citizens. And so they just perpetuated that myth. But look, this stuff has been reviewed by Jewish people, and they're basically saying, he's right. This is what the text says. Right? I mean, I'll give you a perfect example. David Foreman, who's an Orthodox Jewish scholar who's written a bunch of books, wrote a book called The Beast That Crouches at the Door. And the material that he writes is exactly the same thing that I'm pointing out. That all this stuff, I mean, doesn't draw the same conclusions because he's not writing to a Christian audience. Right? But the storyline is the same. Things that happen in that story that the Christian church doesn't even pay attention to because it comes with a different paradigm. Okay? So, I think that's pretty much where we are. So what's the context of work? The context of work is chesed. And chesed means that I act in ways that create bonds between you and me so that I am reciprocally obligated to you and transitively obligated to another. Okay? This is the way chesed works. Chesed means that I see your need. And I know that you have a need. You don't even have to tell me. I observe your need because you come into my assembly. What does James say? When you see someone in need, he doesn't say when they come and ask. Right? I see that you have a need. And so I say, I want to help you in your need. Okay? And I give you a gift that helps you. Okay? You take it. You now accepted the gift that I offered to you, which means that you obligated yourself in a contract with me to repay at some point what I gave to you. That's the way it works. Right? I offered, you accepted. Now you owe me what I offered you. Okay? But Chesed says, you don't owe me. In addition to owing me, you owe someone else who's also in need. So you see that Rudy has a need, you pass it on to him. Guess what, Rudy? You owe her, and she owes me. But when you accepted that, you were obligated to pass it on, so you give it to her. Right? So there it is. So who do you owe? You pass it to her.
I agree.
You owe Rudy, and now she owes you. And you see what's going to happen? As you pass chesed from one person to the next, you pass the blessing on to the next person, and the next person. Here's what happens. As soon as he takes this and puts it in his pocket, what has he done? He showed himself unworthy of the blessing. This is the parable of the debtor. He doesn't pass it on. And guess what? God says, you kept it. You showed yourself unworthy of the blessing that I passed through all these people to you. Therefore, I withdraw my forgiveness. Right? You want to be forgiven? Great. You must forgive others. If you don't forgive others, I withdraw it from you. Because the whole idea of Hesed is that you owe where it came from, and you owe someone else to pass it on to. Right? And ultimately what happens is this. You pass it, and guess what? It comes back to me. And Yeshua says it comes back 100-fold. Does he mean that I now get $100 bills? No, what he means is I have the blessing of passing this through 100 people before it came back to me. Right? So you see how we're going to do work. How are you going to do work? Whatever you do, you are obligated to God to give back to Him and to pass on to someone else. So now you can go and think about how you do work. If the work that you do fulfills the destiny of who you are, blesses others, nourishes and provides for them because you're producing fruit that they can consume, and obligate you to pay back God and pass it on to someone else, guess what? You're doing what the biblical concept of work is all about. But if it doesn't do those things, something's missing from your understanding of work. And what's missing will cause great grief and despair in your life, because over time, it will not satisfy who you are, it won't bless God, or won't delight God, and it won't bless others. It will become introverted. It will become eating your own fruit, and you'll die from it. End of story. So go out and be fruit. Be great fruit for other people to eat. You'll have a great time doing it.